Smagpies! Welcome to the SMAGcast, episode 16. This is another group solitaire edition, and this week we have a theme. Books. So, I've been thinking this week what I can talk about for books. Initially, I thought Douglas Adams, but honestly, I've said everything I ever have to say about Douglas Adams already. Robert Jordan, my favorite book series, The Wheel of Time. Could have talked about that, but the more I think about it, the more I realize it would just be me geeking out and probably end up complaining. So I got to thinking, what book has actually affected me? What books have really impacted the way I live? And I keep coming back to the same answer, which is the books of Scott McCloud. Scott McCloud's an American cartoonist. And according to the Wikipedia article, he is a comics theorist, which I think that's a fairly accurate description. He's worked on Superman Adventures, Zot, tons of stuff over the years. He's most famous for a series of books about the theories of making comics and the metaphysics of it, and that has really affected me. The first book he did came out in '93 and was called Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art. And it talks about a wide range of subjects. But let's talk for a minute about the way it's impacted me. When I first started doing comics, I had no idea what I was doing, of course. Like you usually don't when you start something. The only experience I had was Marvel Comics, Bloom County, Calvin and Hobbes, The Far Side, stuff like that. And I didn't really... I had a passion for it because I wanted to do it, but I was also kind of doing it out of spite. And I had done the series for quite some time. I think maybe around 2001 or so, I picked up Understanding Comics. Blew my mind. I never thought of comics the way Scott McCloud was talking about comics. You see, before this, I saw myself as a cartoonist, just a hack that was doing work like every other cartoonist out there. And as far as I was concerned, the modern history of comics started in the 1930s. I was wrong. Scott McCloud opened my eyes to the fact that comics go back thousands of years. The reliefs on the walls of the tombs in Egypt are not hieroglyphs. We're talking about the large ones that snake round. Those tell stories about grain being harvested, being taken, paid in tribute, and it goes on through that process. That is sequential art. That is a comic. The tapestry that shows the story of the Battle of Hastings, that is a comic. It is progressive images showing the passage of time and what happened. It's the same thing as a comic strip or a comic book. So, we're not following in the footsteps of just Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and, all the people that help make modern comics. We're following in the footsteps of the storytellers of old. We are the modern shamans, telling stories around the digital campfire. And that changed the way I thought about my comics. I started thinking, I need to just stop going and then with these stories. This has to impact people. People have to care. Which is another thing I learned from Mr. McCloud. People have to care about what's happening. You have to make them do some work for it, too. You can't just say, the example I believe he actually uses in the book is showing someone with an axe saying something like, I'm gonna murder you. And you could show the guy gorily hacking into someone, or you can cut to a shot of the city with just a scream. The guy with the axe didn't kill that dude. You did. You did it in the gutter, the space between those two panels. Your imagination did it. He could have been screaming because of a splinter. But you killed that guy. You lowered the axe. And that's the kind of work you want your readers to do. I learned more techniques of storytelling from that one book than I ever did from How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, How to Draw Manga, any of those books, which I do recommend the How to Draw Manga series for a good solid tutorial on certain art techniques and the process of making comics, but understanding comics changed how I see the world of comics. We're doing more than just trying to make money. We're doing more than just trying to meet a deadline. We're telling impactful stories. So yes, I highly recommend understanding comics. Hopefully it'll open your eyes the way it opened mine. If it doesn't, I'm sorry, sue me. He also produced 2 other books. The next one came out in 2000 and was called Reinventing Comics. It was done completely digitally, and honestly, I can't recommend that one. And there are certain predictions he made in Understanding Comics about where it was going to go. And, almost 10 years later, he decided to go back and revisit them, and I don't really agree with a lot of his predictions, a lot of his ideas in that book, and I can't recommend it. You can check it out, but it's also very dated now. It's a 13-year-old book that's looking at a infant internet and trying to predict what's going to happen, and it hasn't for the most part. So he does predict the concept of microtransactions, which it's actually become more prevalent in video games than it has in comics. So right concept, wrong field. Another thing he talks about is the idea of infinite canvas, which I still like the idea, and I would love to work on an infinite canvas comic where there's no separate pages, you just keep scrolling, and it's the whole screen and you scroll. One day, I'm gonna do one of those. I don't know what it'll be about, but we'll see what happens. His third book is more of a meat and potatoes kind of a book. It's called Making Comics, and it came out in 2006. And I bought the book, but the problem is, as I read it, I was like, I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. I learned all this over the last 6 years, which I got it several years ago. But if you really want to know, I'm not talking about how to draw here. That's a completely different thing. If you want to know how to draw, go get a great How to Draw comics book. I do not recommend the Heart books. Go get some How to Draw manga, or drawing comics the Marvel way, or DC way, whatever. Making comics is about structure. It's about technique. It's about the construction of a comic. Not the drawing, but the way you build a comic. And that book, I highly recommend. If you are a little iffy about how to make a comic, this will help you immensely. So, understanding comics and making comics, go get them. They're on Amazon. Anyone who says they're doing comics and they've never read one of those, I always, it blows my mind. So that's about all I've got for now. So we're going to move on to the next person, and I will see you guys at the other end of the SMAGcast.
Hey, all you Smaggy people, it's Mike here, and I don't know if Kevin has put this in the intro or not, but this week we're talking about books that, or at least what he originally said in the email, was to talk about books that affected us. And I was having a real hard time coming up with something. I mean, there's plenty of books that I like, enjoy, have read, and reread, but I can't say any of them have really affected me. Well, some of them have, but I don't really want to go into those. But then I started realizing it doesn't mean that I have to talk about a book that I enjoyed that affected me. So I'm going to talk about George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones. I read this, probably about at least close to 10 years ago. And tell you what, I really didn't enjoy it. I've enjoyed parts of it, but the way it affected me is it made me realize what I want out of fiction, out of entertainment, is I want at least some glimmer of hope and positivity. I mean, these books, and also I want, characters that I can empathize with and don't get shit all over, which he does in his books, or at least the first one. I don't know how it ends up because I didn't read any of the others because I was just so turned off by it. And I'm not saying bad things can't happen to characters I like. It's just the level Martin takes it to left me with zero hope that it would get any better. I mean, look at some of the things. Usually, in the end of your first, book or first, not chapter, but end of the first installment, there is some kind of, positive hope. Even, look at, like, say, Star Wars. A New Hope ended pretty positively. Even though the Empire was still out there, it was still a good resolution. And, of course, Empire left you with a down note, which was fine because because of the first installment, you knew things would get better, even though the end of this movie wasn't, super positive. Just the end of Game of Thrones, one of my favorite characters in the book, Eddard, gets his head cut off. Just when it seemed like things, he might escape, oh yeah, well, sorry if I spoiled it for you, but if at this point you cared about it, you should have known that already. But yeah, all that through that whole chapter, I'm sitting there going, okay, he's gonna get out. There's because he built it up like there was, this hope that he was gonna get away, but nope, cut his head off. That is the moment I knew that this wasn't for me. And the bad thing is Kevin's never read it. I think Warren's read it and didn't like it much. I don't think Paul's read it, but most of our other friends love the books. People that, I hold in pretty high regard. They love them, and I don't see it. Sure, it's got a neat setting and some neat characters, but it was just too much of a downer for me. Also, the rape and incest was a bit creepy for me and didn't sit too well with me. And that's saying something because I've enjoyed Robert Heinlein. And for those who aren't aware, he had a character that traveled back in time and had sex with his mother. So if that put me off, you can kind of imagine what it was like. But to contrast Martin's character treatment with an author I do enjoy and have enjoyed for a long time, even though he's not perfect either. Lord knows I have problems with Robert Jordan's writing style sometimes, but his Wheel of Time characters, let's take Rand al'Thor from Wheel of Time, a character who is going mad. Towards the end of the books, he has lost a hand. Spoiler alerts, of course, for anyone who hasn't read it but wants to read it. He has lost a hand. Rotting, has multiple unhealing wounds. But I never at any point thought this character was unsalvageable, or this, was the end for him. There was always a hope that things were going to work out for him, and they do. And then I'll also contrast the killing of a character that I enjoyed with something that with it being done in another series, Wash from Firefly. Spoiler alerts. I should have put spoiler alerts at the beginning of this thing, but it's too late now. But in Serenity, Wash gets killed, and I wasn't too happy with that, but I could see why it was done from a writer standpoint. And it didn't feel as malicious or cheap, I guess, as Eddard's death. I don't know. Maybe if I hadn't read Game of Thrones before and was just starting to read them now, I might enjoy it more. But it's just too much water under the bridge now. I have that bad taste in my mouth, and I've tried to watch the series even, and I'm like, yep, I know what's coming. Or maybe it just boils down to I'm a big Care Bear that can't stand bad things to happen to his favorite characters. Who knows? Well, it's a little under time this week, but I'm just going to go ahead and hand it off to the next person. Unless I'm last. I better not be last. Bye.
Hello, Smagpies. It's me, Paul. I'm back again at the end of the SMAGcast. This week's theme, which you've probably already heard, is a book that has changed your life. And this is the first time we've ever done a theme, and I'm not really sure there is a book that's actually changed my life. I know there's books out there that have changed other people's lives. I was trying to come up with something, like, Tobin's Spirit Guide or something from Ghostbusters, but there's been a few books that I've read that I really, really enjoyed, one being Ready Player One. If you don't know this book, you definitely need to go pick it up. A long time ago, I picked up this one book by Ian Irving. It's called A View from the Mirror. I read the first 50 pages, hated it, put it down. 2 years later, I didn't have anything to read, so I went back and started it again. And once I blew past the first 50 pages, I was like, oh my god, this story is fantastic. 4 books in the series. Each book's 750 pages each, somewhere around there. Fantastic, just constant run, keep going. A book that's changed my life. I'm going to have to go with probably either the Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader first edition book, which got me into the whole Warhammer 40,000 universe, and 7 armies later, and a whole bunch of money spent on these things, on the little miniatures used to play the game, and all the terrain that I've built from various assorted things around the house, beer cans and PVC pipe and everything. You could definitely say that the Rogue Trader book did change my life, because I ended up spending a whole lot of money. So secondly, the other book that I thought about was the second edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. Now, I had played role-playing games before this. When I was in junior high, I had some friends, a guy named Josh and his older brother Jerry. I'd go over to their house and we would play Star Frontiers. It's a futuristic, I've got a laser gun, I'm going to shoot you, haha, roll some dice kind of a thing. And that was a lot of fun. It did lead me to creating my own role-playing game at the time, centered around ninjas, and there was another one that I created as well, unknowingly calling it Gangbang because I didn't know what that meant, but it rhymed and it sounded cool, so that's why I went with it. My mom was like, maybe I should call it something else, and I was like, why? It sounds cool. Because I didn't know, because I was 13. So the second edition handbook for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, I started playing that initially 9th grade on the bus going to, I think it was Memphis. Our gifted class was going to Liberty Land, and my friend Zach had built a character for me named Strider, of course. And I had a horse, and we had something we had to do, and I don't remember what it was. I actually still have that character sheet somewhere at the house. But once I got the second edition handbook for D&D, I started making my own characters, and I started running games for people every now and then. Zach was mostly our DM in the beginning. I had a character named Wrath the Dumb. He was a fighter, one that I had inherited from somebody else. Turns out he wasn't actually dumb, but the guy before me who was playing the character played him like he was an idiot. So that's how I played him, because I didn't know any better at the time. But Wrath would charge into battle screaming, "George to the rescue." He had a bucket for a helmet that he never cut eye holes into. He used this one special weapon called a plungar. It was a spear with a plunger tip at the end. So So he would stab people and start making the plunging motions. And that was the plungar. When I started running games, that was when it just really made a difference in my life, I guess you could say. I don't know if difference is the right terminology, but whatever. So I would run games for my friends, some of the SMAGcast people, and some other people, and I didn't play again for probably 10 years, really, in any fashion. It was just me running games constantly. I was sitting at work, drawing up dungeons, coming up with new monsters, things of that nature, which led to me getting other role-playing games. One that I found that I truly loved was Alternity. It was made by TSR, the same people that made D&D at the time. But it's out of print now. They're not doing anything with it, but it's set in the distant future. It could be a space opera or anything like that. What I ran for Mike and Kevin of the SMAGcast was this one kind of Firefly-esque game where they had to go find somebody named Trevor. That was the beginning of the adventure. And they're at this town, and they're like, hey, we're looking for this guy named Trevor. And all the people was like, Trevor? Oh, yeah, he's good people. Go over here, ask somebody else. Okay. So they'd go ask somebody else. Oh, Trevor? Oh, yeah, he's good people. When they finally found him, Trevor's a 7-foot-tall house robot who was tinkered with by one of the previous owners, and he now thinks he's a gunslinger. And he's got a southern accent, and he's just mentally deranged, basically. Whenever they said, well, we got to go take this shipment of whatever up to this one place called 10 Kill, he said, hey, I ain't driving. Talks kind of like Carl from Sling Blade. But he would do other things, like when Mike's following behind on the hover bike and Kevin's driving, all of a sudden the truck just kind of swerves a little bit. You see something flying out the window, and then Trevor runs off into the bush after it. Comes back, he goes, that was my hand. Holding up his hand, because he had it on the dashboard and he thought it was a spider. Later on in the adventure, Mike and Kevin are asleep. Trevor's standing guard. Mike wakes up. Trevor's looking directly over him. Just says, no. Stands back up, sticks his tongue out. They never really did find out where Trevor got a human tongue, but that's just one of the joys of Trevor. I ran a campaign for about a year and a half, the Underdark, which is a campaign setting for Forgotten Realms, which is one of the, I guess, locales in the D&D universe. The adventure centered around, oh no, there's this farmer and his daughter's kidnapped, and hopefully the player characters can go find her. So they go down into a cave. And the cave happens to be 250 miles long, with no other outlets. So whenever somebody would die, there would just magically be another dwarf with a whole bunch of armor and weapons and food and stuff just tied up right down the hallway there, right down the cave. And then there's the new guy. So players kind of got overpowered a little bit. Had to reel them back in. But the player's handbook definitely changed my life. It taught me to tell stories better, how to run an adventure, how to get people together, how when you have a Nerf gun and people aren't paying attention and you shoot them with it, they start paying attention. Also, when they're not paying attention, you just look at them and say, okay, well, you take 20 and that's initiative. And everybody's like, wait, what? What's going on? It's like, well, you weren't paying attention, so now there's a dragon, which really screws with people. And then, of course, I wasn't a dragon, but they started paying attention again, which was the idea. Also, in addition to playing the games and running the games and things of that nature, there's a whole slew of novels. And I would read the Dragonlance series. I never actually ran any of the Dragonlance adventures or anything. Never actually even played in the world of Kryn, I think it was called. But there's all these books, all these novels that go along with it. It tells the story of like 9 or 10 adventures and how they come together. It all starts with the Chronicles, which was like Dragons of Autumn Twilight, Dragons of Summer something. Great series, really good series. Most of my friends read those, if they did read them in high school. I started reading them right after high school. Fairly easy reads, but if you like fantasy adventure, like Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, definitely go pick those up. So I definitely have to say that it's either one of those two books. It's either the Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition Player's Handbook or the Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, which, by the way, that book, everybody that I have ever talked to who had that book, even people online, have said that, yeah, I had the book, and then the spine screwed up and all the pages fell out, which seems to be a thing. Like, if you can find one on eBay with the cover still on it, then it's worth a lot more. Mine had holes punched in it and was stuck in a 3-ring binder. So with that, with our books, I will give it off to Kevin to close this thing out, and hopefully he puts me in the right spot, because otherwise this isn't going to make a whole lot of sense.
Alright, well, as you can see, we're a little short this week, but that's okay. I think we had a good show, and we'll see you guys next week for our usual roundtable discussion. So until then, everybody stay smaggy. This has been the SMAGcast. If you have any thoughts or questions, you can email us at thesmagcast@gmail.com. Our theme music is Out of School by Jazar from the album Traveler's Guide, which is available from freemusicarchive.org and used under Creative Commons license.